I am simply saying, as a way of, we're not sure how many folks from other parts of the state will be joining us. Everyone is welcome, of course, and have gotten a blurb about it, but we'll see how that goes. And just that as we look at the caucuses this week, all three of them, it's always good to remember that these issues came from the grassroots and have worked their ways up through the different leagues in various ways as concerns of the members. And what we see for the next 3 evenings is presentations by our peers in the league. So it's always good to remember that we are volunteers and that we are not professionals, and we might have a glitch or two, and that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything at all. So our first topic that we're going to look at tonight, Joan, what do you think? Should we start with something else and then have you go afterwards? Or have Susan? Do you think we should, what do you think?
I'm good with whatever you want to do. If
Well, if Susan isn't here when we finish the video, are you ready to take over?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and start. So, with no more ado, the first issue that will be going before the convention brought from the Metro League is financing of public schools and proposing a statewide study of the means of financing public schools so that we might advocate for improvement in that area. Okay?
So I guess I'll start by sharing the screen.
Okay.
All right. So I just see something in here. It says just joined. There was a passcode.
There's Sarah. Sarah made it.
All right.
Good.
All right. I'm going to share the screen. All right. Oh, I'm going to make this big.
Did you click on the sound?
I got to tell me if you can't see it, hear it. Okay.
Can't hear it. You have to go back to the share page and turn on the sound.
So
Catherine?
What do you want me to do? Could you hear it? Not at all?
Catherine, passcode's 1919.
Nope. Angie,
Okay.
when you share,
Okay.
if you make sure when you click share, there's a checkbox in the bottom left corner of the share window that you click to share your sound with the other participants in the Zoom.
Right.
Okay,
just make sure that you click that.
Okay, share screen.
Screen. Yeah. Click on it. And then you'll see it. You'll see the box. Once your share screen choices pop up,
yeah,
you'll see in the lower left-hand corner a place where you can
share
check for the sound.
Okay, I see.
Got it. Okay.
Let's try again.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success?
Now I'm going to move forward.
Frankly speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as
Then I got one more piece.
The sound is muffled. Is there anything you can do about that?
I turned it up, so sorry.
It's not not
Alright.
volume, it's
Second,
muffled.
let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
All right, I'll stop sharing. Okay, that was just pieces of a video, and education was one of the parts that was described as a thing that we really need to work on to help with systemic racism. All right. Joan, take it away.
Okay, hello, everyone. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Education Committee. We have for many years, as I'm sure a lot of you know, we have for many years dealt with the issue of inadequate funding for public schools overall, not just in the Black neighborhoods, but in the white neighborhoods. But it is more pronounced in the Black neighborhoods. And so when we saw this video, we saw this as a good way to show what happens when the state relies on property taxes as its main source of funding. And that is the issue. Property taxes in the Black, property values in the Black neighborhoods are not nearly at the level that they are in the white neighborhoods. So it is the youngsters who are going to the Black schools who suffer. But I would like to make known that not only do they suffer, but it creates a problem that everyone suffers because those issues spill over into other neighborhoods. What we were trying to do with education is identify some other ways of funding. And so we looked at a number of possibilities, and we want to continue to look at those possibilities. And so that is why we are here. I don't think anyone can argue that the system that we have is fair. It's not, it's unfair. And it is never going to be fair as long as we continue with what we have. So what we are here tonight is to ask for your support for us to be allowed to identify and bring back to you our ideas for other ways of funding education, public education, because we know, and I'm sure all of us who have worked through this legislative session, we know that the legislators that we have in place now are not going to be in any position to equalize education. And let me, and before I go, let me also point out that in terms of teacher salaries, just teacher salaries, Missouri ranks 48 out of 50. Now that's not good. We don't like that. In 2020, which is the last year that we had because it was before COVID, Missouri was short $100 million in funding for education. And they never did fully fund the foundation formula. Also, Missouri does not spend any money from the state coffers for maintenance on buildings, for new construction, or any of those things. The money for those dollars comes out of the local, out of the local coffers. And if you live in a wealthy district, you have that. If you live in a poor district, you don't. So I'm thinking that most of us understand this issue. And so once again, I am asking for your support to allow us to move forward to identify other forms of funding for education. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. Just a reminder, this is asking for a state study. A state study, I'm not sure who that is on the phone. A state study is just what it sounds like. There is a state study committee for this issue. We ask for volunteers from all over the state who are interested to join the St. Louis committee to make up this state committee. And at the end of maybe 1 year, maybe 2, when they are able to put forth the committee puts forth their recommendations for advocacy, then they would bring them back to be a main position for the Metro League and to go forward from there. So they've started the work. They've done a good job. But what we all need to do at the meeting is to support them with a yes vote for their study and to provide people from our local units. Because when we do this, we need data from all over the state, especially if we're going to try and change the law in any way. You know, it's an uphill climb. So we'll need help with that also. Does anyone have a question for Joan about their request for a study? Dolores, please turn your mic on.
I have 2 questions. Okay.
Start over, please.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. That's better. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. A question. It was saying taxing financial transactions. What are financial transactions?
You know what? I'm going to stop that because that's just one of the options. It's like where you put a tax on every transaction a bank has, say, and they have to pay like 2 cents on every time they
Nancy?
change money. Yes, I'm sorry, Susan.
Hi, I apologize. I got into the meeting late. For some reason, I couldn't get in. What a financial transaction tax would be, say, on the purchase of stocks and bonds, things like that, or anything that hedge funds do. And it would be a very small tax, a fraction of a %, because there are so many transactions on a daily basis, especially amongst people who, dither in the stock market on a regular basis, that you can raise an awful lot of money with a very small percentage of a tax on those sorts of things.
Okay. And second of all, I have a question to educate white and Black youngsters. Urban districts and other districts too, I guess, have a lot of students of color. I was wondering why that was just saying Black rather than all the other ethnic groups that are the majority, especially for those of us that live in urban districts.
Can I answer that, Susan?
Sure.
This video was something that they found to bring out the subject. There is no discrimination on who needs more funding. It's a statewide, every district situation. If there was there was no intention on that. It was a tool to help just talk about the issues. And it's time for us to move on to our next subject. If you have a question for the committee, please put it in the chat and they will get back to you about that if you would type that in there. Okay. And we are taping this. If you can see that little recording button that's on. And so information will be saved and it will go on. We'll now move on to our second topic.
Nancy,
Yes.
I would like to just make just a few seconds to respond to Dolores's question. the fact of the matter is, historically, it is Black students who have suffered disproportionately from the inadequate funding. And so there, and of course, this has been going on for a long time. So that, I guess that would be the largest group, you know, and of course there are others too. And it is not true that all local districts suffer that way. There are some districts that have such wealth that frankly, instead of getting help from the state to pay for education, they really should pay into the general pot. So, you know, that there are some districts that are extremely wealthy and they don't suffer much at all. There are very few, but there are some.
Okay, thank you,
Could
Louise.
you allow
We
me
need
to
we
add
need to move
something?
on.
Nancy, could you please allow me to add something to what Louise said?
1 minute.
Okay, less than that. Actually, what you have is when you rely on property taxes in majority African-American districts tend to be lower simply because of the discrimination in the banking industry over the years against loaning for home improvement loans and any other improvements and development in majority African-American districts. So they don't have the property wealth that other districts have because of historical discrimination that is still going on, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, these are all important subjects tonight. We need to give them time. Again, this is for the study. That one was for a study. Our next issue that we're going to talk about is our criminal justice concurrence. And this comes from out of our policing committee in Metro St. Louis. And Mary Leopold is going to be the presenter. She has served as chair of that committee for most of the last years and most knowledgeable. So she's going to take that over now. Mary?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for coming. And I join Nancy and everyone else in welcoming you here. I need to check something quick with Nancy. Nancy, at this point, my presentation is 30 minutes. Shall I concentrate on shortening that, given that there's still another group to go, and that does not include questions for me?
Well, if you can shorten it so you have time for more questions, I'll shorten mine at the end, okay? We'll split the difference.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to screen share now. Share. I don't need that, but I do need this. All right, and then slideshow. Okay, try view. There we go. All right, so this is our title slide. This is about a Missouri concurrence. Oh, I got to get rid of you like on the side because I can't see my slides. All right, this is a Missouri concurrence with the California and the Arizona position on criminal justice. We're asking you to vote for adopting this new position for the state of Missouri's League of Women Voters. We're presenting this tonight. I'm representing the League of Women Voters St. Louis Policing Committee out of the Metro League. Here is the position that we propose. First, we propose that the League of Women Voters agree to support a criminal justice system that is just, effective, equitable, transparent, and that fosters public trust at all stages, including policing practices, pretrial procedures, sentencing, incarceration, and reentry. In addition, we ask the League of Women Voters in Missouri to state that they believe in a criminal justice system that relies on evidence-based research in decision-making about law enforcement programs and policies, including scheduled periodic audits of program and policy effectiveness. We think that this new position is in line with existing League of Women Voters national positions and with the urgent resolution on racial justice passed by national last summer. Here are an example of some existing League positions at the national level. The first two are specific aspects of the criminal justice system, and they would be consistent with the broader statement position that I just read to you. The other 5 are also consistent with our proposed criminal justice position. Those are things that the League at the national level supports for all people, whether they're part of the criminal justice system or not. In the summer, as I mentioned, the National League put out an urgent resolution on racial justice for Black people and people of color. This is part of it. I'll just read the underlined parts. The League advocates against systemic racism in the justice system, and at a minimum, for preventing excessive force and brutality by law enforcement. Skipping down to the second paragraph, the League wants to help our elected officials and all Americans recognize these truths to be self-evident, that Black, Indigenous, and all people of color deserve equal protection under the law. So both of those things seem to us to fit very well with our new suggested position on criminal justice, which you can look at here just to make sure. In the remaining time of this presentation, I'm going to try to make the case that there are some things in our criminal justice system that are broken and need to be fixed. I've organized the talk into 5 parts, 1 part for each of the 5 stages of the criminal justice system that you see underlined in the first bullet on this slide. I've rewritten those 5 stages on the next slide. As I give you data in each of these 5 stages of the criminal justice system, I'm hoping that you will be asking yourself, is what is happening now just, effective, equitable, and transparent? And does it foster public trust? We'll start with policing practices. There are several areas of concern. I'm just listing 4 today. Let's look first at the top one, the use of force, including police killings. Of course, police killings is the most serious issue. How do we know if there's a problem with use of force and with police killings? The truth is, right now, it's pretty hard to find out. It wasn't until 2019 that the FBI started its current use of force database. This would be a perfect place for us to go to find out about use of force in policing. However, the police departments are not required to send in their data. As you can see in the first bullet, you only submit it voluntarily. At this point in the US, about 5,000 of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in our country provide data to this database. And this represents only 42% of the officers in the nation. I'll skip over this part about what the database includes or is meant to include. I'm very much in favor of that description, but right now we don't get all the data. The last paragraph is about Missouri. Only 17 out of our 631 agencies in Missouri provide use of force data to this FBI database. In terms of the number of officers, only 26% of law enforcement officers are covered. We're only getting data about 26% of the law officers. Furthermore, the FBI is not releasing any of this data yet to us for some good, some not so good reasons. But we need to, do we have any information while we wait for the FBI to report out to us? And the answer is that we do, because there are private groups that have gone into the business of counting police killings. We don't have data on use of force, but we do have it on the killings. What you see here is the general idea that I'd like you to take away, that approximately 1,000 people are killed by police each year, going back to 2013. It's been staying about the same. There are various sources for this information, and they vary by some numbers. But if you just remember, oh, about 1,000, all sources agree on that number. Well, how is the US doing compared with other countries? Because like, maybe this is fair and maybe this isn't fair. And that's not what I wanted. Oh yeah, I didn't want to move the slide. Okay, so comparing with other countries, we generally measure, when comparing with countries, how many police killings there were for 10 million citizens. So given that, try to get that kind of a number. For the United States, it's 33.5. So around 34 people killed by police per every 10 million citizens. What's Canada, our neighbor? It's 9.8. It's not 34, it's 10. What's Australia? It's 9. So one question to ask is whether or not this many police killings is too many. Is it just? And another issue is whether these killings are equitable. Here you see a graph that looks at equity. The first top bar shows the percentage of people who had contact with police who were of various races or ethnic groups. So of the people who had contact with police, 11.5% is what the graph says. The bar below that says that, however, out of those who had contact with police, 20% had experienced use of force instead of what you might expect it to be 11.5%. You see a similar disparity with Hispanics. Is this equitable? Well, let's focus in on Missouri. The number of police killings jumps up and down, but it's roughly 28, about an average of 28 per year. How does this compare to the United States as a whole? This is total number of killings right here. What about that police killing rate? Well, you might remember that the United States rate was 33.5. In Missouri, we have a higher one. We have 46. 46 people killed per every 10 million people. Is that just? Also, as far as equity is concerned, you are 15 times more likely to get killed by a police officer in Missouri if you are Black than if you are white. One final zooming in a little further, very high interest to anyone who lives here, but hopefully also of interest to people everywhere in the state. On the left, you see that St. Louis City is the worst city in the nation.
Nancy Miller here. Did you get in?
Nancy,
Okay,
could you
good. I don't see your face on the screen.
mute yourself? Thank you. The worst in the country for the number of people killed by police. And it's not just by a little bit. Now, how does that compare with the other numbers we had? So we had 33.5 for police killing rate for the United States, and we had 46 for Missouri. For the city, it is 169 people per 10 million. Are the Blacks singled out? Well, on the right, I would say the answer is yes. St. Louis, while not the first, thank goodness, is the fourth highest rate at which the police kill Blacks. And if you look at the number of Blacks killed per 10 million Blacks, that number is 600. How about some of the less egregious claims about use of force and other things in policing. This is just a quick hit on some highlights. In 15.7% of the use of force incidents in the in Missouri, the citizen was Black. And of course, as you remember, Blacks make up about 11.8% of the Missouri population. So there's a disparity there. For traffic stops in Missouri, this is a number from 2018, Blacks were 91% more likely than whites to be stopped by law enforcement. And finally, in Missouri, Black and Hispanic residents are 70% more likely to be searched once they're stopped, and 90% more likely to be arrested once they're stopped. Moving on now to the second of our 5 stages of the criminal justice system, we'll look at pretrial procedures. Before your trial, you might spend some time in jail, or you might get out on bail, or it might be you spend a few days in jail and then you get out on bail. In pretrial procedures, we are trying to balance protecting the public from dangerous persons with treating people as innocent until they are found guilty. And also, we're trying to keep suspects from fleeing before their trial. How are we doing? Well, we do have large numbers of people in jail before they have been proven guilty. And I will show you that in a moment. Second, we know that pretrial incarceration does harm to anybody who's in there. And third, there is some indication, this isn't as sure, that there is also a harm to community safety, which is counterintuitive. And finally, there's a concern with equity issues, that the poor and people of color are the ones ending up in pretrial detention more than other people. So let's look at the first of those, that there are a lot of people. Jail incarceration rates have been increasing in Missouri, mostly due to the increase in the people being held before trial. So in jails, you have some people who have been convicted already of low-level offenses, maybe not so low, but lower than in the prisons. And then you also have people who have not been convicted yet and who are waiting for trial. And you can see that the tendency to hold people before trial in jail has very much increased, at least in this time period, 1978 to 2013, which is the last that I have. Being in jail pre-trial for low-level and nonviolent crimes is quite common. The Supreme Court has talked about this. In 1987, they affirmed the constitutionality of detaining someone before trial for reasons of public safety. However, they also made it clear that, quote, in our society, liberty is the norm, unquote. And they also said that detaining someone prior to trial is, quote, carefully limited exception. Is that what Missouri is doing? Is pretrial detention an exception? Let's see. Whoops. You know, I missed a slide where I showed how many people were in. Let me just make sure. I thought I did. Should have been one right before this, but there isn't. I apologize. That's a glitch on my part. I have to take time later to find that. Okay, after the numbers, another thing that we want to look at is what harm are we doing with this practice? Well, it's pretty obvious that it does harm to you if you're in jail. I mean, sometimes you have to be, but you're in jail, you can't go to your job or to school. When you're in jail, you therefore have less money to pay your bills. If you were getting your money from a job, you might even be evicted from your apartment for non-payment. If you have children, you can't care for them. You might lose custody. And of course, the longer you're in jail, the more harm is done. In Missouri, some poor defendants have waited in jail for more than a year before even getting a public defender assigned to them. This violates both the US and the Missouri constitutions, is obviously wrong. Also, 1 in 5 jail inmates has a serious mental health issue, and we're asking our criminal justice system to deal with mental health when clearly that is not what it's designed to do. The third of the 4 points under pretrial procedures is about harm to the community. The longer that low-risk defendants, we're just talking low-risk defendants here, are detained before release, the more likely they are to commit a new crime before their trial. So if you're thinking, how can they commit a new crime if they're in jail? This is talking about people who spend a few days or more in jail pre-trial, and then they get released on bail. If they're detained there 2 to 3 days before getting released, they're about 40% times more likely to commit a new crime before they go to trial than defendants who are released quickly. It seems to be important to get you released within 24 hours. And then the bottom paragraph, once you get convicted and then you serve your time and you get out, there's still a lingering effect of your pretrial detention, it seems. Such a person is more likely to commit a new crime after conviction and serving his or her jail sentence, the longer his or her detention was before trial. And finally, looking at inequities in pretrial detention. First, bail amount. It turns out that it's very hard to figure out why one person gets one bail amount and another person gets another. For the same crime, the bail amount can be quite different. Then, of course, this does not feel equitable to the people getting the bail. It's also rather untransparent how these bail amounts are set. Second, poverty. Bail hurts the poor the most. They're the most likely to be in jail pre-trial because they don't have the money to put up for bail. And this we're not talking about just a few really poor people. Data shows that for nearly half of all Americans, raising $400 for an emergency is something they cannot do. Third, people of color. Here, I'll just give you an example from St. Louis. The white pretrial detention rate is about 4%, but the Black pretrial detention rate is 11%. That doesn't seem equitable. There's some looking into. And finally, women. The problem here is that women earn less than men. So although most women are in jail for nonviolent crimes, they are less likely than men to be able to afford their money bond. In fact, a study found that women in jail before trial earned scarcely enough each year to cover the amount of their bond. Are we criminalizing poverty with this practice of pretrial detention? Are we singling out women and people of color? You have to answer for yourself. Next, we move on to the third stage of the criminal justice system. Once you finish up with your pretrial detention or your bail, it's trial time. The questions here are too many people being found guilty and being incarcerated? And also, of those who are being found guilty, who is being found guilty? Is it being done in an equitable way? Let's look at these in turn. This slide compares the 2018 Missouri incarceration rate with the US as a whole and with a few other countries who are democracies. To explain that term, incarceration rate, it means the number of incarcerated persons per 100,000 citizens. And it includes jail, prison, and any other, I can't think of another, but if there's another way you can be incarcerated, it includes all. So the numbers, which I'm sure you can't see, I'm going to read to you the first two. So the incarceration rate for Missouri is 859. That is noticeably more than for the United States, which is 698. But both of them are crazy high compared to other democracies. I was wondering what was the next country after the United States. Because clearly there's something missing here. And the next country that incarcerates people at a rate right below the United States is El Salvador. Possibly not a country we would like to compare ourselves to and be in their peer group. So we have a lot of people incarcerated. Is that number going up or down? Turns out that number is going up. I draw your attention to the top orange line. No, both of them, never mind. And you can see that both the number in prison is going up and also the number in jail is going up, but the rate in prison went up very fast for a while. Then it kind of, you can see how it kind of plateaued a little after 2005. This graph only goes up to 2014, but we know from the earlier slide that our incarceration rate in Missouri is much higher now, because by 2018, it was 859. This graph only goes up to 600. Then is a question of whether certain people are singled out for imprisonment and being found guilty. This slide shows the absolute numbers of prisoners in Missouri in 2016. You notice that most of the prisoners are white, but also notice that the percent of prisoners who are Black is 34.2%, whereas in the population, Blacks are only 11.8%. Again, shouldn't that 34.2 be more like 11.8? This is another way of looking at how incarceration affects Blacks in Missouri. It shows incarceration rates for various groups. Overall, you might remember the rate for Missouri was 859. For Blacks in our state, it is 2,337. Moving on to the fourth stage of the criminal justice system, which is incarceration. Let's say you've been sentenced. Now, what's it like while you're in prison or jail? Issues here are physical and sexual assault, solitary confinement, and the COVID response. We'll look very briefly at each of these in turn. Regarding physical and sexual assault, there is a study I was looking at by the National Institutes of Health that says nearly 40% of men and women in prison had experienced physical and sexual assault by both staff, not both, but by either staff or another incarcerated person within the previous 6 months. This is 40% in the last 6 months. This is not 40% from the time they got in there, which would be a higher number. If you think that's an issue, then you may want to advocate on that. The second issue in incarceration I wanted to talk about was solitary confinement. People who experience solitary confinement are more likely to develop mental problems. There are 4 of them in dark print there. They're also more likely to experience physical problems, which are those 3 things in bold there. And solitary confinement disproportionately affects Black and Hispanic people and those with mental health conditions. Here's a graph that shows one thing about that, which you may find interesting as I did. I'm just looking here at blacks. So if you look on the left, the total prison population is 43% black. And then you go over, what about the solitary confinement population? Oh, I'm on the men's side, on the left. And solitary confinement is 46. So my reaction to that was, 43, 46, that's close together. I'm more concerned about it being 43 compared to the 11.8. But those two don't seem that different. But look what happens on the women's side. 23% of the women in prison are black. 40% of the solitary confinement population is black among the women. That's, to me, a large disparity. And the last problem that I wanted to highlight about incarceration was the COVID response. US state and federal prisons, all taken together, have a COVID case rate 4 times higher and a death rate from COVID twice as high as in the general population. The staff at prisons in Missouri are not required to wear a mask as of August 2020. In some places, there's a mandate to wear them that is not enforced. In other places, well, you should bring them in with you, but you don't have to put them on until you get really close to someone. As far as the vaccine goes, as of late April this year, only 27% of the staff in prisons had received the vaccine. And of course, that is how COVID gets into prisons, is from the staff. Last year in June, Missouri got graded on its COVID response in prisons. It got an F+ for its handling of COVID. And this report and the data was gathered by a combination of ACLU staff with Prison Policy Initiative staff. The last stage in the criminal justice system is the reentry stage. You've done your time and now it's time to live on the outside again. The issues that I wanted to mention here are recidivism, which of course means you come out and then you just commit some more crimes and then you end up back in again. And the very closely related issue of the lack of preparation for and support during reentry. Looking at recidivism, among state prisoners, this is all states in the US, well, 30 states, sorry, an average among 30 states. About 2/3 of people who were released got arrested for a crime within 3 years, and a full 3/4 got arrested again within 5 years. And this is only the ones that got caught. In our state, the most recent recidivism rate that's been published by the Missouri Department of Corrections is about 44% for all releases and 40%, a little bit less for the first time releases. So people coming out and just keep on committing crimes is definitely an issue. Let's see. One issue that is facing people who come out of prison or jail is that they don't have money saved up. They do work in prison, but the pay is very low, somewhere between 50 cents and $1.25 an hour. And there are also some fees to be deducted from that, and prices for phone cards and other things in the prison shops are really high. They end up not having savings, and then because of how they ever lived before, just the fault of their own, they don't have savings either, perhaps. And you can see here in this graph, not surprisingly, that incarcerated people do not build up much in the way of savings. The solid lines are the people who never went to prison or jail. So those solid lines are up high. You can notice the whites do much better than anyone else. Not surprising either. But the dotted lines are the ones who have been in prison. And those people they just sometimes don't even manage to scrape by. And there might be, in your mind, some link between poverty and crime. When people re-enter, besides money savings, not having them, other issues of which I'm sure you're all aware are that their job prospects are really poor. They often have lost their home and they don't have shelter. Many people have a drug addiction or a mental health issue or something else that requires support that they may not get. And also finally, parole requirements, I mean, you have to have some, but sometimes they're so strict that it's very difficult for someone to get to those parole meetings when they don't have transportation and they aren't near them, and the parole meetings are all during work times. So that can be hard. Parole requirements can also be hard on participating in drug and mental health treatment and fulfilling your financial obligations. So that completes the 5 stages of criminal justice system. If you've seen anything tonight that bothers you or that you think might be a problem in your own area of the state, I hope you'll consider approving our proposed criminal justice position on Saturday at the Missouri League of Women Voters Convention. 2 reasons you might want to vote for it are listed here. Our criminal justice position is a broad statement that most people can get behind, and it would allow your league to have a voice in any statewide policy regarding criminal justice. In addition, your Missouri region may have different needs and concerns regarding criminal justice than other regions. After study with this position, your local league can take action and take a position and do advocacy work on whatever local criminal justice issues are most relevant where you live. I'll leave you with the criminal justice position that we're asking you to vote for. We'd love for the League of Women Voters of Missouri to adopt this criminal justice position.
Thank you very much, Mary. Good
And
job.
thank you right back.
Okay, so you can tell this committee's been working long and hard, and if you would be interested, this is all on a PowerPoint, and they have a long list of sources that match the information on the PowerPoint that you can, we'll be happy to give you a copy of. Anything that we can help you with on this, especially as we spread the word about this across the state. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at in 7 minutes, we can do this, is the position that we are just, Metro is bringing it forth. It comes from national to us to adopt. And I need to share a screen. I hope it's ready to go. Anne, can I go ahead and share?
That shouldn't be a problem.
All right. And I'm just hoping that I pull up the right thing, right? That's always a challenge. All right. And this is, well, we'll just let it go because we don't have time to mess around with it. This is about electoral systems. When they talk about election reform at the national level, it's not voting per se. It's not like what it looks like when you go to vote or making it sure it's safe for voters. It's about the system behind it. And that's what this concurrence is. They have asked all states to, all state leagues to adopt this. Electoral systems, well, I'll just whip it up here. It's about voter representation, not about security, transparency. And this is a main sentence here. The concurrence is about increasing representation for voters via the electoral system. One type of system that's out there, several states are using this now, is called ranked choice, where when people go into a primary, they actually have to rank the choices. When St. Louis started thinking about doing their election reform, they had to consider that the computer setup in the city of St. Louis is not capable of handling ranked choice because it takes manipulating of the numbers and doing several layers of calculations. Another system that they did use was the approval method. And this is not, this is from a different kind of race. But if you take into consideration as you look at this, all of these people were on the same ballot. And if you look at the percentages up here, that means like Mr. Moe over here got a vote from 52% of the voters. So did Mr. Horgan. 52% of the people approved of him. Only 42% voted for Ball or approved of him. As this goes on, and I'll show you what this looks like, I'm just going to skip right down here. Whip, 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 whip. Okay, this is St. Louis. This is what it looked like. I mean, there were more candidates, but in the primary, there are a number of people. The top two winners, which in St. Louis mayor's race turned out to be Tashara Jones and Kara Spencer, then move to the final, to the general election. What this does is give you someone who actually wins by a majority. There are many times in St. Louis, because of the demographics, that we have had a mayor, such as the one who just left, who won with 30-some% of the vote. And one of the things that this method does is allows you to make sure that your winner has won a majority. Now, there are many different types of systems. This particular, as you can see here, the position that was approved last summer at National does not support any particular electoral system. As an individual league, you are not expected to support any particular electoral system. No system is perfect. However, some of these are better. Some of the systems we use do a better job of representing voters, I'll say that. While many leagues have positions that support